Hey guys, so today I'm doing my September wrap-up. So I'm going to be telling you about all of the books that I read throughout the past month. As usual, I'm going to start with my least favourite books that I read this month and work my way up to the 5-star reads. So my least favourite book that I read this month, which is one that I gave 1 star to, is Into White by Randy Pink. So this is a YA contemporary, I guess it's not really contemporary because it has like magical elements to it, but it's about a girl called Toya, which is funny because it's very close to my name, but she really badly wants to be white. So she prays to wake up white and one day she does. So it's kind of like a be careful what you wish for kind of story because it's just her journey experiencing being a white person, I guess. I don't hardly ever rate books 1 star, like that's extreme in my point of view. But there is literally nothing that I liked about this book. Usually I can dislike a book even quite passionately, but there'll be something redeeming about it. Like I'll think, okay, the writing itself is actually quite good or something like that. But this book, I didn't like the writing. I didn't like anything about it. The most obvious problem to me with this book is the fact that it relies very heavily on racial stereotypes for black people and for white people as well. It's all of the characters that fit into those like 2 categories are very stereotypical. Basically it just felt really lazy, like the writer didn't develop unique characters. Even our protagonist Toya, I didn't feel there was a lot of depth to her at all. It's in first person, I think, from her point of view, and you just don't get any idea of like what kind of person she is at all, aside from the fact that she really wanted to be white, and all of her concerns throughout this book are to do with race and all of the, you know, the way she thinks about everyone else. Everything is a judgment based on someone's race, and she just doesn't have any consideration for anything else at all in life. That's her like sole concern. And a book that's like entirely about race would be fine if you just want to have a book that's all about you know, racial stereotypes, racism and things like that. That would be great, but there isn't any like wisdom or insight or anything to be gained from this book. In my opinion, I just didn't find any value in it in regards to that at all. There are cameos by Jesus in this book, which I just found pretty ridiculous, to be honest. It just made him into this really wacky like character, and it just felt really weird. It was kind of like a magical realism sort of thing, and everyone who came into contact with him or anyone that found out about that through Toya like wasn't really that surprised by the whole thing or the fact that Toya was like now white. They were all just too accepting of the whole situation and didn't really question it at all. I just thought the writing was really bad as well. As I mentioned, there were parts of this that I feel like literally just didn't make sense to me, like the plot didn't always like add up and things didn't really flow from one thing to the next. Like I just thought the writing wasn't very good. There's also very extreme, problematic, disgusting representation of eating disorders in this book. It only gets sort of briefly dealt with in a couple of places, but it's extremely harmful representation, and it doesn't get called out or questioned or anything by any other characters. So I'm gonna read you a quote, which I don't often do, but I thought like it's necessary in this instance just to like show you why I was so mad about it. There were people out there with cancers, diabetes, real stuff that can't be cured, but their cure, there being people with eating disorders, was 4 quarters away in a McDonald's drive-thru. So that will probably get some of you racked up. It got me racked up, and I just thought this book is ridiculous. And yeah, so basically I didn't like anything about this book and would not recommend it at all. The other book that I rated 1 star this month, I know some of you guys will get riled up about this because I know a lot of people love this book so much, but for me it was a 1 star read, undeniably. This book, though I have to say like I don't think it's as bad as Into White, I really didn't like anything about this book either. I'm not going to go too much into the plot because it is a book where if you do want to read it and you like, honestly, I'm not going to say I don't recommend this one because so many people do love it. I think it just was more a case of like it definitely wasn't for me in multiple different ways. But it is like a mystery thriller type of YA book, so I don't want to give away anything about the plot. But the basic premise of it is that it's about a family who go to an island every year for the summer holidays. They basically own an island, so they're a pretty wealthy family, and for me it gave me very much like Gossip Girl type vibes. Like, it's really emphasized how wealthy they all are and how privileged, and they have this like amazing holiday every year all together as a family. Like I said, it's a mystery thriller kind of novel. There's something that happened one summer and you spend the novel kind of piecing that together and trying to figure out what has happened. First of all, the main thing in the beginning that I didn't like about it was the writing style. It's just one of those cases that it's definitely not for me. It's super, I would say, overwritten. I know some people would say the writing is like beautiful, but for me, I don't like this type of writing where there's a lot of like metaphors all the time, and there's also like this. So it's basically kind of written like going on to different lines. I can't remember what that's called, but it's a thing you do in poetry, but it's not done in a way that I think is like poetic. I think it's something that is pointless and done just to like look like something on the page, but it doesn't add any meaning like, or any like rhythm or anything like that. That's the purpose I feel like you use that for in poetry. You use it for emphasis, to emphasize like different parts of what you're saying, or you use it for the purpose of like rhythm, like a, you know, the flow of the poem. But I just felt like it was something that was used in this that was completely unnecessary and just like a bit pretentious because it didn't need to be there. So that combined with the metaphors, I just couldn't handle this writing style. It's not for me. There was a lot of focus in this book on family issues and things like alcoholism, and those types of issues are just not things that I like to read about generally. There are very few instances where I like to read about like family disputes. A lot of the characters, as well as like being horrible, they kind of just didn't really have much of a personality, and there was not very much for me to differentiate between them, aside from like they all had names. And basically the story, what it ends up being in the end, I just thought was absolutely horrible and disgusting, and something that I wish I could unread, but I can't. I don't know, like it wasn't beautiful. It didn't have a point. There's like no lesson to be taken from it. And I understand that is the case with like thrillers and things like that, but I don't think it was a good ending. I just don't. You know, when you get to like the end of a thriller and it's really satisfying because even though you haven't guessed the ending, it all like makes sense all of a sudden, and that's like the cool thing about thrillers sometimes. I just didn't find that with this book. I think it was just like a complete like shock ending to shock the reader, and I just thought it was like repulsive. I just didn't like this book, obviously. But if you don't mind reading about like horrendous family issues, and if you like that really like overwritten kind of writing style, you might like this book. Another book I read this month was a reread for me, and this is the first book that I rated 2 stars, My Bookie Book by Russell Brand, which is one of his like autobiographies. It was like not terrible, but I just wasn't particularly interested by it. I really like Russell Brand. I used to like his stand-up comedy a lot, and I like what he's up to now with his podcast and everything. It's his life from when he's a child up until he ends up in sex rehab. It's told chronologically, which I quite like in an autobiography or a biography, and it's quite well written for your typical like celeb bio. He is quite a good writer, I think, or he just has that very like distinctive Russell Brand voice and tone. It is funny at times, but as with a lot of autobiographies, it is like a bit awkward at other times and a bit depressing. If you're really interested in Russell Brand, I would recommend giving it a read, but if you're not particularly interested in Russell Brand, then I wouldn't recommend it, and it's not one that I'm going to want to read again for sure. I had a few 3-star reads this month, and the first one was Stormbreaker by Anthony Horowitz. This is the first book in the Alex Rider series, which is like a middle grade spy kind of series. It's about a kid called Alex Rider whose uncle dies in mysterious circumstances, and then he kind of ends up getting recruited for a kind of like secret mission. So it's a super fun book. It reads very much like an adult crime novel, but for kids, which I really liked that writing style. I really like reading crime fiction sometimes, and if you have read a bit of crime fiction, you know what I mean. It has this very distinctive, like straightforward sort of writing style, so I really enjoyed that about this book. The only downside of that type of writing is that I feel like you don't get as close to the characters, so I didn't feel like super connected to Alex, but it was a fun story nonetheless. The next book that I rated 3 stars was The One by Kira Cass, and this is the 3rd book in the Selection series. I've talked about this a lot recently, this series, but it's basically like a dystopian The Bachelor, so a whole bunch of girls go live at a palace and the prince has to pick one of them to marry. As with the other books in this series, it's super fun and I totally recommend this series. If you want something that's like just lighthearted and fun to read, I definitely recommend this series. The only thing is that America is like very back and forth about like what she wants, so she is kind of an annoying protagonist, but it's super fun anyway. The final 3-star read that I have this month is Replica by Lauren Oliver. This is a YA like sci-fi novel. As you can tell by the title, it does have something to do with like clones. Immediately when I first heard about this book, it reminded me of the series, like middle grade series called Replica by Marilyn Kay. I was obsessed with that series as a kid. It has like little similarities, but not really. It's an interesting format of a book because it has like 2 sides to it. So there's Lyra and there's Gemma, and they kind of like meet in the middle, so you can either read alternating chapters or you can read through one of the girls' perspectives and then switch to the other one. And there are parts of the story that overlap, but they are 2 like distinct points of view, so there are things that happen in one that you don't get to see in the other. I alternated. I started with Lyra and then alternated with Gemma's chapters. I kind of wish that I had have just read all of Gemma first, because Gemma is like outside the whole like sci-fi world, so I feel like it would be cooler reading from her perspective first and then reading Lyra to like fill in the gaps afterwards. I really liked the story. I thought it was a really cool concept. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the whole like 2 different stories meeting in the middle kind of thing, because alternating chapters especially, it did feel a bit repetitive. The characters I was kind of like so about. They were alright, but nothing that like super stood out to me. And the writing style and like the romances and stuff were also like just so, except there's a guy in this called Pete or Peter, and he was really cute. The first 4-star book that I read this month was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas, and this is the first book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I'd been wanting to read this for ages, so I was super excited to get to it, and I did really enjoy it. It's basically a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So there's a girl called Feyre who kills a wolf, and the wolf turned out to be a fairy, so she has to go like live with the fairies as punishment kind of. I really like the writing style that Sarah J Maas has. I think she's a great writer, and Feyre was a really believable protagonist. I could identify with her quite easily. I feel like she made decisions that I might make maybe. In terms of the male characters in this book, I loved Lucien. I think he's probably my favourite. I warmed up to Tamlin as the novel went on. I wasn't initially a huge fan, but like warmed up to him a bit. And then Rhysand is like absolute scum. I hated him in this book, and it really shocked me because I'd heard everyone say how much they love Rhysand, I guess from the next book, but I was just like, I don't see that at all. I thought he was horrible. The setting was absolutely beautiful. I think that's probably my favourite thing about this book. I just thought the like fairy realm and the spring court and everything, I could picture the whole thing, and it just really appealed to me. I thought that was so cool. So yeah, overall I really enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend reading it if you haven't already. The next 4-star book that I read this month was Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. This is a YA contemporary about a guy called Simon who has like a guy that he's chatting to online who goes to his school, but neither of them know who the other one is, and they're kind of in like an online romance, I guess. There is romance in this, which I really liked, but it also deals with school and like family stuff and friend stuff and like coming out and things like that. Guys, I read too many books this month, and I was like scribbling down little reviews all over the place for this wrap up, and I've got written down, reminded me of TATBILB. I cannot for the life of me remember what that stands for. Like, what book is that? TATBILB. I have no idea. If any of you guys know what book or TV show or whatever I might be referring to, TATBILB. It's like the acronym. I have no idea. I'm sorry. Since I really wanted to find out who Blue was, I read it in one sitting. I started reading this thinking like I'm just gonna read a chapter and then like go do something else, and I got hooked and I just sat and finished the whole thing. My next 4-star book was one that was like a super big surprise to me. I wasn't expecting to love this one as much as I did, and it's With Malice by Eileen Cook. This is another YA thriller, and I liked it obviously way better than We Were Liars. It's about a girl called Jill who wakes up in hospital after going on an educational trip to Italy. So she wakes up in hospital and has no idea what's happened. There's been some kind of accident, but there might be more to it than that because the police are involved and stuff. It was a really interesting writing style. It's told from Jill's perspective, but it also uses like police interviews and like snippets from the media and from blogs and things like that, comment sections, emails, like all different stuff, which I thought was really, really cool. It's an incredible and really realistic portrayal of how crime or like criminal cases like play out in the media as well as like behind the scenes. I just found it really, really interesting and really, really realistic and really cool. It kind of deals with how many people like jump on the judgment bandwagon and decide that someone's guilty before they've had a chance to even defend themselves. It's definitely like a psychological thriller as well, and it deals a lot with like what people are capable of doing. I thought the characters were great. It was just such a fantastic book all around. I was really surprised by this one. Yeah, and I highly recommend it if you're in the mood for a good like mystery thriller. Finally, I just have a couple of 5-star reads for the month, which are both classics. The first one is Winnie the Pooh by A.A. Milne. This is obviously a children's classic. My favourite one is called the one in which Eeyore has a birthday and gets 2 presents. Eeyore is definitely my favourite character, always has been, like ever since I was a kid. He's just super existential and like sarcastic and really, really like, he says the saddest things and makes like really sad jokes. I just really like Eeyore. I think he's like classic. I love him so much. My final 5-star read and final book that I read this month was All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Remarque. It's a World War I novel. I thought it was World War II, but it's based around World War I. The author was a soldier, I think, for Germany in World War I, so it's based on kind of his own experiences, but it is like a fictionalized story. It just shows the day-to-day life of a German soldier pretty much, and shows how war affects people, how wrong it is. It doesn't glorify war like I feel like other novels can do at times. I just think this is a very realistic account, and I think it probably just is a reflection of the fact that the author was involved himself. It really just shows how everybody involved is still human, like no matter which side you're on. It's a really, really harrowing, I think a really important story as well. So that was my super long wrap up for this month. If you've read any of these books, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys with another video in a couple days. Bye.